to our Californian tasting. I'm joined with Dimitri Mesnard, who is a master sommelier, and he's going to go through the wines with us this evening. Dimitri works for Jackson Family Wines, and all the wines are from Jackson Family this evening. Thank you for joining us, Dimitri.
Thank you, pleasure.
And thank you for joining us, everyone. First thing I've got to do is I've got to go through some housekeeping rules. So if you'll bear with me, you will all be muted during the presentation. But if you have any questions for Dimitri or myself, please use the chat function at the bottom right of your screen, and we'll be very happy to receive questions throughout the course of the tasting. Indeed, we have a bottle of Jackson Family Chardonnay as a prize for the best question in the first half of the tasting. So we taste 2 wines and then we have a break, and then we taste another 2 wines. So the best question for Dimitri in the first half will receive a bottle of Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. So that's an incentive to start asking questions early on. There'll also be a Q&A at the end of the tasting, so there'll be plenty of time to ask questions. Don't worry if I appear not to have noticed a question, because there's a team from O'Brien's behind us supporting us, and they're feeding all the questions through to us. So we definitely will get all the questions, and we'll get to them as the evening goes through. To get the best view of your hosts, that is if you want the best view of Dimitri and I, please use speaker view on the top right hand corner of your screen. This tasting is being recorded, but it's only the hosts that are being recorded, so you can leave your video on. We won't be recording you, and if you feel comfortable, turn it off, but don't worry, we won't be recording you. And please remember to eat and drink throughout the tasting. There'll be a break after the second wine, and we always suggest that you either have some nibbles beside you, or you can top up with food or water, or indeed top up with some wine at the break. And then tomorrow we will send out the link to the tasting, so you have the opportunity to review if you didn't see all of it this evening, or if you want to look at it again. So all of the rules done and dusted. Thank you for your patience on those. So first of all, Dimitri, welcome along to our US tasting. Delighted to have you with us. And I think the first thing that we should say is that you're not in fact from the US, you're actually French, from the Loire Valley, is that right?
Exactly, and I think people will notice it straight away with my very strong French accent.
Exactly. And tell us, how did you get into wine, Dimitri? I know you're from a wine family, and was it a natural progression that you basically decided to pursue a career in wine? Your grandparents had vineyards, is that right?
I mean, my family had some land on an appellation in France with Quincy, which is in the middle of the Loire Valley, not too far from Sancerre. So my uncle used to have a property, stopped making wine in the 80s. So I was very young, but I've got the memory of going to do some harvest, in the summer with my family, helping them at the weekend because he needed a hand to help him to harvest. So I've got those sort of memory, but I was not sort of destined into the wine industry because my father by trade is a banker. My mother had a dry cleaning shop, and when I was at school, I mean, I studied catering originally, so to be a chef, a waiter, a housekeeper, and because I was okay at school, I decided to go to university, so to study history and geography, but. I think when you go to university and you are a young lad, you need to be pretty focused. And I've got to say, I wasn't really focused. So my mother was becoming not very happy with me not going to university and spending more and more time at the bar drinking. So she said, okay, you have to do something. So you have to go and work, or you have to find your way. So I decided to go and work. And my first job as a waiter in a small restaurant, the guy was passionate about wine, like me. So each time I was off, he would bring me to go and visit some grower, and I guess that's how the sort of the passion started, or the sort of the click in my mind, sort of occur. Yeah, I mean, my parents always drank wine on Friday and Saturday and Sunday. My father had a good cellar, but I never really thought about wine until probably my first job, and working alongside that owner who had a real passion for wine, and took me under his wing and started to over. So from there, I decided to do a wine school, and that's where really sort of everything happened, and the passion sort of started to grow. It's difficult when you are young, I think, to look at what you want to do. I was with my daughter this afternoon, and she's got to sort of pick her uni. So she's looking at university, but she's 17 years old, and she's saying, Dad, there is all those options, and I don't really know. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that 17, I was the same. I didn't 17, 18, until you meet the right people, and they sort of give you, a passion for something. It's quite difficult from the beginning. So a bit of trend, meeting the right people at the right time. I'll say that's where the passion started to grow, and then coming to the UK was really the big step, working with some top people in top restaurants. I work at Le Manoir aux 4 Saisons, who was a 2-star Michelin with Raymond Blanc, so famous chef. The head sommelier over there was an incredible person, and I worked with him in different projects for 15 years. So I guess he's really the sort of the big first step on the ladder in terms of wine culture. So
amazing, and the passion is still going to this day. Before I ask any more questions, let's pour ourselves a glass of Kendall Jackson Chardonnay, as we call it in O'Brien's, the KJ Chardonnay. And tell us then, is it when you were at Le Manoir Carte Saison that you decided to pursue the incredibly difficult, rigorous process of becoming a master sommelier?
Yes, I mean, at the time, the head sommelier was called Henri Chapon, used to prepare for the World Championship. So, and his mindset was very particular, because he always to have someone in front of him when he was doing his revision. So when I was 19 or 20 years old, I was sort of at the forefront of helping a top guy in the industry. So yeah, that's sort of how the passion for wine came, and he was studying to become an MS also, so he was already in the program. So he sort of gave me the desire to sort of start doing it. And like anything, I mean, you are a master of wine, and when you enter a sort of a system like that, it gives you energy. You want to get better, and it's really a sort of a personal choice. It's to enable yourself to be in a system who makes you a better person and bring you more knowledge and so on. So that's why you do those.
And I mean, did you? How many years did it take you to become a master sommelier, Dimitri?
Probably about from start to finish, probably about 7 years altogether.
Yeah.
And at the time, we had the master sommelier program. We had one less exam than we've got now. So yeah.
Okay, it's a huge commitment, really, isn't it?
It's a huge commitment in terms of time. It's a financial commitment also, because a lot of people don't realize, to better yourself and to understand yourself, especially when you are young and your base is pretty bland. You have to travel, so you have to go to. You have to buy yourself some sample to train for blind testing and those sort of things. So, and when you are, I mean, me, I did it, I was very young. So in those days, I didn't have much money. So it was always, it's difficult. Sometimes you've got the pressure of doing well in your job. You want to put the commitment and the time to study. And I always say I used to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to study in the morning. I would go to bed very late because I'm quite a late person. So I would learn at night and do my note in the morning. That's what I used to do.
And I suppose in the process, you had to drink some of the finest wines known to humanity.
That's a great part of it.
So I'm often asked, before we start to talk about the Kendall Jackson Chardonnay, I'm often asked the difference between a master sommelier and a master of wine. And tonight I've got the opportunity for me to ask a master sommelier, what's the difference between a master sommelier and a master of wine?
There is plenty of answer, but I think probably the main difference is the master sommelier. It's really done towards people who work in the hospitality business and who works really in the restaurant trade. Because it's a 3-part. I mean, the Master Sommelier, so the last exam with a sort of the 4th-year exam is a 4th exam, so the last exam. It's a 3-part exam where you've got a theoretical part, you've got a testing part, but you've got also a practical part. So really, if you are not, if you've never worked in a restaurant and you don't understand the process of the service, it'll be very difficult for you to be able to gain the Master Sommelier title, because that exam is sort of has been developed towards the hospitality industry, and really it was developed to sort of give a guidance and ameliorate the whole industry as such. So that's it was sort of founded and created and developed.
Alexander's asking, looking back at your experience now, what would you tell your younger self, Dimitri?
What would I tell? Test even more. No, I'll say, you know, take every opportunity to travel probably even more. I was very lucky because I've always worked in great enterprise, being Le Manoir 4 Saisons, or I work for about 12 years for Hôtel du Vin, really at the sort of the growing stage of Hôtel du Vin. I joined the second. So I work with someone who was called Gérard Basset, who is really one of the great wine figure in the wine industry in the world. I work always in very successful concepts. So we were always sort of invited to go on trip. So I've been very lucky in that side, being part of successful businesses, because people wanted to have their wine on our wine list. So they wanted to invite us to show us, you know, their estate and even the businesses, the wine businesses of the UK, because they were successful businesses, we would sell a lot of wine, so we would buy a lot of wine. So I've been able to travel quite a lot, but I think traveling, it's important to really understand, to go and see the area, because when you are in a place, I think it makes you understand it better, and really sort of exchange as much as you can with the people in the wine industry, and that can be, you know, people making the wine, and when you say making the wine, you know, there is the winemaking sort of part of it, but there is also all the work we've done in the vineyard. So don't just exchange with the winemaker, exchange also with the viticulturist, with the people who look after the vineyard, because that's going to make you understand also why the wine tastes like that, and so on, and the commercial aspect, exchanging on wine with anyone who is part of that industry, it's always interesting and sort of enable you to learn. And I always say one of the great things about wine, it's no one will know everything about wine, and it's always about exchanging about it. And even if someone, you know, hasn't got the sort of your general knowledge on wine, they can always teach you something, because they know something you don't know. They've been somewhere you haven't, and that's what makes the world exciting and great. So
yeah,
you know, it's
everyone in the industry's got their own specialism.
Of course,
and they're so focused on the bits that they know and passionate about the bits that they understand and know about. So, Dimitri, there's a couple of questions coming in, but why don't you tell us how you got into working for a US company, and maybe tell us a bit about the Kendall Jackson Chardonnay when you start to explain about how you got into this US company working for Jackson family.
I mean, Kendall Jackson is a fantastic wine. I'll start with how I did get to work for Jackson Family Wine. It's when I finished my time at Hôtel du Vin after 12 years working for them. The company had been sold a few times, and I wanted to have a sort of a different project. Originally, I wanted to open my own restaurant and my own boulangerie-pâtisserie in Tunbridge Wells, where I'm based in Kent, in the UK. But I was approached by someone who used to work for Jackson Family Wine. They were looking to sort of hire someone who would originally look after the UK and sort of develop some of their winery into the sort of the high-end restaurants or the five-star hotels, the star Michelin restaurant, because their presence was probably not as big as they wanted over there. And knowing now the inside of Jackson Family Wine and knowing the family, this is really a sort of their vision. It's making sure that their wine are present in the great table around the world, because they are proud of what they do. Their wine are great, and they want them to be placed. So originally I was approached to do that, and when I was at Hôtel du Vin, I used to be in charge of about 9 different hotels at the end. So I had 4 sommeliers per hotel. So we used to have quite a lot of people under me, and we used to work quite a lot with Jackson Family Wine. So when I was approached, I said to them, I said, the project looks very interesting, and it was a project that was very interesting because they own more than just Kendall, Jackson, or La Crema. We will test tonight. They've got more wineries than that. And I said to them, I said, I'm a wine guy. So what's really important, it's what inside of the glass. That's, my sommelier side and my passion for wine really speak. So I said to them, I said, I know quite a lot of the winery, but I don't know everything. So if I'm interested in the project, I'd like to know more about the wine. So they said, okay, Dimitri, no problem. Come to California, have a look at all of our property, and then we can, sit down and discuss and see if you are interested. So they sent me to California. Fantastic. I mean, what a great start. Even
a hardship.
Having started the job, go to California, look at all the property. I think it's a great commitment to the family and show how great their vision is and how passionate they are about their wine and the quality of the wines that they make. So went over there, they sat me down, and I said to them, I said, as a buyer, I would buy, about 80% of what we produce, because we've got some great property. I mean, of course, as a personal person, you've got preferences, but as a buyers, and I was, and that was the had before, we produced some fantastic wine. So that's how I thought I did get incorporated in Jackson Family Wine, and been working for them for 12 years. It's been a great journey. The portfolio has also grown with purchase and acquisition of vineyard or winery, and now I'm involved in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, in South America. So great. I mean, it's been a great growth, a great personal growth, and a great portfolio. When we talk about Kendall Jackson, because that's what people want to hear about, it's a fantastic wine, and I always say the story of Kendall Jackson is quite incredible, because everything started in 1982 when Jess Jackson, to make a long story short, Jess was a lawyer by trade, but by the age of about 55, wanted to sort of step back from his businesses and wanted to sort of go back to the roots of his family. His family were farmers. So he looked for a property to go and sort of grow things from the earth and spend some long weekend with his family at the time. And he found a property in Lake County, with about 3 hours north of San Francisco, on top of the Napa Valley. And on that property at the time, he had some apple trees, some pear trees, some walnut trees, and he was selling, the fruits to other people to use it to make whatever they wanted to make. But he also had a little bit of Chardonnay planted originally on the property, and he started to grow a real passion of growing Chardonnay. So started to plant more, and with the idea of maybe one day making his own wine. But in 1982, you had a sort of a mini financial crisis in California, and no one wanted to buy his grape. So being quite a sharp guy, he said, okay, I'm not going to sell my grape at a loss. So if no one wants to buy my grape, or if I'm not going to lose money, I'm going to make my own wine. And that was the beginning of Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. What Kendall Jackson Chardonnay has become over the years. So Kendall Jackson Chardonnay is the most drunk Chardonnay in America, and has been so for 29 years. So it's a big statement. It's a wine with very well known, and is the most sold Chardonnay, but it's a Chardonnay also. It's at a premium sort of premium tier of wine, because in Ireland, how much do you sell Kendall Jackson Chardonnay, Lynne? It's probably about what, 20 euro a bottle. Yeah. So
I can't remember. It's about that. Yes.
Yeah. So it's what I'm trying to say, it's a premium wine, and for it to be the most sold Chardonnay in America for 29 years, it really shows the quality of the wine and how people are sort of loyal also to Kendall Jackson as such. For me, what makes the success of Kendall Jackson, it's first because it comes from the coastal region of California. And if you look at California as such, the best terroir in California, or the best location to grow grape, as a big generalization, would be the location who are close to the ocean. So what we call the North Coast, with north of San Francisco, with the historical part of growing grape in California. So that's where the history of the industry started. Then between San Francisco and Los Angeles, with what we call the Central Coast, who are area who have developed themselves in the last sort of 60 years. Quite cool area generally. I mean, you always say if you go to Monterey, people before the 1980s used to think it was too cold. But what makes those areas great is the proximity of the ocean. And you always say the ocean, the Pacific Ocean, is a mass of cold water. If the water was warm, yes, California will just be too warm to be able to grow grapes. So that influence is crucial to enable, grape growing in California. And the closer, in a way, you are to the ocean, the better the area to produce wine will be. I mean, that's a big generalization. As you move more inland, where the bulk of the Californian wine industry is made in what we call the Central Valley, with probably about 100 miles inland, is quite desertic. And I always say, technically speaking, you can make some okay wine, but you will never be able to make some great wine because you are too far from the ocean. It's quite desertic. There is a lot of irrigation. And to give an idea to people, you can make as good asparagus as you can potato, as you can grape to make wine to a certain extent. So the wine, okay, but they will never be extremely fantastic because you are going away from the Pacific Ocean. And the family, all of their vineyards are close to the ocean because Jess always wanted the grape to grow and everything he was doing to have a sense of place. And that's what makes Kendall Jackson. Kendall Jackson is not just coming from one area, it's a blend of Chardonnay from the coastal region. So we have fruit coming from Santa Barbara, with about an hour north of Los Angeles. We have fruit coming from Monterey, with between sort of San Francisco and Los Angeles. We have fruit coming from Sonoma, and everyone will know. We have fruit coming from Mendocino, and it's a blend of all those areas who creates the complexity of Kendall Jackson. What makes Kendall Jackson also is there is a barrel aging who gives that sort of creaminess on the palate, who makes that Chardonnay sort of very nice. So.
And Dimitri, we can't pass the opportunity up of asking a master sommelier to talk us through the aromas and the flavors of the Kendall Jackson Chardonnay.
I mean, what I like about Kendall Jackson Chardonnay, I think it's really a great product. I mean, it's what we are known for. There is no doubt about it, and that has been the success of the family who has enabled them to do other projects. But what I like about it, it's you get when you smell the wine, you get that sort of tropical character with there, and that comes from the grape very often who are grown in Santa Barbara, not too far from Los Angeles. You get those sort of lovely sort of pineapple, papaya, that sort of mango character with the sort of first impression, that sort of exotic fruit you get on the nose and even on the palate when you have. And then when you smell the wine or when it comes on what we call the mid palate, so when you start to swallow the wine, you've got that tropical characters and you've got that sort of oak character with there who come from the barrel aging. So what we do is we make the vinification, we put the wine into barrels and we move the lees inside of the barrel. So lees is the sediment sort of goes at the bottom of the barrel to give that sort of creaminess. So what the juice will do, it will eat all the lees, and that's what gives that sort of creamy, sort of yogurt, sort of butter or brioche character into the wine. That's what we call batonnage and lees and lees contact and aging in barrel. But that's what
it's quite it gives a bit of this texture on the palate because of the lees as well, and it's really obvious with the with the Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. You've got a gorgeous texture as well on the wine.
Yeah, so in terms of sensibility, exactly, you get that sort of roundness, texture sort of element sort of broad character. And in terms of descriptor, in terms of aromas, that gives that sort of, yes, creamy, sort of lactic yogurt, sort of brioche, toasty sort of character. That's where it comes from, and that's the sort of the mid palate. And what I like about Kendall Jackson, and I think for me, what sort of really shows the quality of Kendall Jackson is you get on the back palate, or you know, the sort of the secondary aromas when you swerve the wine into, you start to get those citrusy sort of elements, that sort of ripe lemon, that sort of lemon peel, or sort of
slightly kind of grapefruity nut notes as well.
Exactly, yeah, exactly. And that's what's nice, because you get those tropical character, then the creamy sort of touch, and then that sort of freshness, who for me sort of clear your palate, making your palate ready for a second glass.
Okay, Dimitri, thank you for going through the Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. I'm going to pour the Pinot Noir now. So if people want to move on to the Pinot Noir, it's the Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir. And I'm going to ask you one of the questions, Dimitri, from Helen. She's asking, what's the best wine you have ever tasted? Very hard question, I know.
Yeah, I think it's about, I mean, wine for me, translate it as an emotion, you know, and the emotions and wine can procure can be also influenced by the time of the day, who you are with, all those sort of things. I don't know. It's very difficult because there is great wine for every occasion, and it's not necessarily expensive wine where you've got the best sensation. So some of my best memory, probably I mean, best memory with very personal. One of my great emotion of wine, it's when I was working at Le Manoir aux Quatre Saisons. We use a customer who had a few bottles of wine in the cellar. So he would come and ask us to go to the sort of his cellar, inside of the cellar at Le Manoir aux Quatre Saisons. And I was young, I was 20 years old. I never tasted Petrus in my life. So Petrus, it's Bordeaux, it's from Pomerol, it's made with Merlot. It's probably one of the most expensive wine from the world. So it's one of those references. And when you are young and you study about wine, it's one of those things, when you mention the name, you have stars in your eye. It's quite funny. And so the guy said, okay, can you get me a bottle of Petrus? And he said, I want Petrus 1976 with my date of birth. So we decanted the wine, poured the wine to him, and we did start to talk about wine and everything. And he said, I said, you know, I'm very excited because this is the first time I opened a bottle of Petrus. And he said, and 1976 is very special to me because it's my date of birth. And the customer was so fantastic because he said, it's your date of birth. He said, okay, you know, get a glass, pour yourself a good glass and drink it at the end of the service. So one
amazing.
Of great memory of wine because of everything it sort of represents.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is many.
But wine is so much about people, isn't it? If you opened a bottle of Petrus on your own, it just wouldn't have the same.
Definitely.
You know, it wouldn't have the same experience. It's about sharing it, and it's about the memories it invokes and where you were at the time and so on. And that's one of the wonderful things about wine, isn't it?
Yeah, of course, yes, of course.
Another question that's not dissimilar from Seamus. He's asking, what restaurant that you've visited, Dimitri, has the best wine list specifically matched to the food?
Oh, that's very interesting. The best restaurant matched to the food. I mean, it's difficult because menu evolves. And some of the great wine lists I've seen around the world. I mean, if we look at the UK, I mean, you go, there is a club called 67 Pall Mall, it's on St. James, on the St. James Street, not too far from St. James Street. They've got an incredible wine list. I think they've got probably about 5,000 bin on the list. So anything you want, older vintage, great list. Food and wine. I think it's. I'm quite a big fan of Japanese culture. So when I go to Japan, I've been to some great restaurants with some great food, with some great wine list. It's a difficult question. Can I give just one? No, I mean there is there is a lot of great restaurants with great wine lists. After, it's the sommelier or the team of sommelier who are there. I always say to people, they know better than anyone, in terms of food and wine matching, because even people like us from the outside, we can guide. But until you go to the restaurant and you really taste the food, I always say to people, give five different chefs a recipe, you will have 5 different results because their interpretation is going to be different. So it's about also knowing, the food, and that's why when you go to a restaurant, always ask the sommeliers, because every day or each time there is a new dish coming on the menu, if they are good, they will ask the chef to taste it. So they can really sort of picture, they know their wine is the best also. So us, you've got an idea, and hopefully, because we are professional, you can guide them people at 90%. But if you want the sort of the best experience, ask the people who are over there.
Okay. So if you're in a good restaurant, ask the sommelier, because he's bound to have tasted the food and the wine together. And
exactly, and he knows the wine. He knows at what development the wine are, depending on the age. But he knows the food of the chef inside of out. And like I said, give 5 different chefs, 5 different recipes, you'll have 5 different results.
Yeah. So let's move on to let's move on to La Crema, the Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir, Dimitri. And before we talk about the wine, can we talk about Pinot Noir shaped glasses?
Great. I mean, that's for me. There is two things who can really have an impact in wine when you drink and taste wine. It's first is the temperature of the wine, the temperature of service, because I think that has got a big influence. Serving a red wine, and it's not going to measure of the Pinot Noir, because Pinot Noir is quite a delicate grape, and serving often wine in general too warm will bring the alcohol out of the wine. When you serve it a little bit cooler, you've got the acidity very often will gain. So I always say Pinot Noir, try to, if you don't have sort of a small ice bucket, stick it in the fridge for 10 or 15 minutes. Just if you don't have a Eurocave, if your bottle is at room temperature, that's going to put down the temperature and your experience is going to be much better. Pinot Noir also is very perfumed. So you want a glass with slightly broader, just to get all of these aromas. And I always say to people, pour the same wine in 2 different shaped glass, you will see your experience, it will be completely different. And you even have the impressions, and it's a different wine than you've got. So for people out there who have never done it, try it once at home, because have a dinner party and have 2 different glasses. Or one of the things I love doing at home, it's I've got some black glasses at home, and this is to serve sometimes wine in one in black glass and one in a clear glass, and sometimes pour the same wine, and you've got the comments. It's I prefer this wine, or I prefer this one, and it's exactly the same wine. So shape of glasses are very important. Temperature of service is very important. Preparing the wine is also very important, depending on what you are trying to do. But Pinot Noir, the broader the glass is, the better, because all that delicacy, that sort of soft you want.
Thank you for that. So just moving on now to Sonoma Coast and the Pinot Noir, and you mentioned already about this, the Pacific is obviously really long ocean, it's cold, but one of the important climatic influences of the ocean in California, and particularly in places like Sonoma, is the
fog.
The influence of the fog, isn't it?
Exactly.
In terms of protecting the grapes from the sun.
And so the grape are protecting the sun with the fog, but also the fog helps to cool down the vineyard. And it's a side story, but for people who go to California, I always tell the story. One of the great things to do when you are in California, if you really want to have that sort of Californian sort of atmosphere, it's to hire a car without roof, a convertible car. Yeah, you put American music and you go down from San Francisco to Los Angeles, because that's an amazing drive. And it's an amazing drive because the road, I think it's a 101 who goes down, the further you are away from the ocean is probably about 50 meters. So in terms of panoramic view, it's an amazing drive to have. It's one of those great drives you can do in your lifetime. But when I tell the story, I always say to people, but you have to be very careful. The way to do it is from San Francisco to LA, because if you do LA to San Francisco, you are the wrong side of the road. So you really want to be the side of the road, the close to the ocean. Very often, they will stay in San Francisco and they will say, okay, 9:30 we go and we'll stop for lunch is Monterey. Like I said, it's about 3 hours south of San Francisco and between San Francisco and LA. So a lot of people do that, stop in Monterey or Carmel because there are two beautiful spots or big sour to have lunch. But if you go too early from San Francisco, one of the things people don't realize is you get the fog. So the whole principle of doing that road is a panoramic view. But if you go too early in the morning, you get that fog, so you don't get to see the view because of that fog. And that fog is so important. It's a contrast of the cold sort of air coming from the ocean with a cold mass of water and the warmth coming from inland, so coming from the Arctic. That's the sort of the two meeting each other, create that fog to sat on the vineyard and keep the vineyard, very fresh. And that's critical for La Crema. The motto of La Crema, it's really not to sort of pick fruits from vineyard who are more than, let's say, 20 or 25 miles from the ocean, because we really want that sort of influence. And Sonoma is the area with the closest to the Pacific Ocean. So Sonoma, it's a big sort of area, it's a big region with a lot of different regions inside of the region. And Sonoma Coast is the one who goes alongside all the sort of the Pacific Ocean. So very cold. That's why it's great for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir all together.
It's such an elegant Pinot Noir. It's really beautiful.
Sorry, I'm probably the only one being French who can say that, but I love La Crema Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir. I think it tastes like Pinot. It's got those sort of lovely strawberry, raspberry, cranberry sort of character. You get that sort of nice, also sort of a sweet spices who are there a little bit because.
And fresh though, it still has a lovely vibrancy on the palate.
Aging. Yeah, it's got this sort of character. I always say California has got such a big role to play in terms of educating people on Pinot Noir, because I think the problem of Pinot Noir, it's Pinot Noir has got a very thin skin, so it can get affected to disease. So it's quite a hard grape to grow. So you really need the right condition to grow Pinot Noir. You need the freshness. You need the freshness. If you are in an area with too warm, you will produce grape who are sort of sweet and heavy and very attractive, not making very attractive wine. But
this has a lovely vibrancy on the palate as well.
Yeah. It's got that sort of round, silky, and for me, it's a fantastic. I mean, it's a premium wine. No doubt. La Crema is a fantastic value for money. It's great.
Amazing. I love it. So, Dimitri, we have another couple of questions here, and then we're going to take a break. So the first question is, hi, Dimitri, this is from Michael. Hi, Dimitri, if COVID impacted your sense of smell and taste in a negative way, would you still be able to work as a sommelier?
I've had a few of my friends who are sommelier who had COVID. I mean, I had COVID. I didn't lose my sense of smell, so I was very lucky. But a few of my friends have lost the taste, and it took them a few weeks and a few months to rediscover their sort of full capacity. So, can you still be a sommelier? I mean, it's all depends what you want to do. If it's to choose wine and to construct a list, it'll be very difficult, no doubt about it. If it's to open a bottle of wine and serving wine, I think you don't need your nose to be able to do it. But to be able to make suggestions, yes, you will struggle. So you will probably have to change career. I haven't met anyone who have completely lost it and still they've lost it for a couple of weeks. But I mean, they were sort of fine because all the restaurants were closed anyway, so they've been sort of okay.
They weren't called upon to use their talents. And final question here then: French or American oak in the Chardonnay, Dimitri?
So it's a mix. It's a mix of both. So for the Chardonnay, spend about 7 months in oak, French and American oak going into the, I mean, depending on the vintage, on that vintage, I think it's about oak and 7% of American oak. So it's a mix of both. For La Crema Sonomaco, it's nearly all French oak because it's 98% of French oak for La Crema. So
okay. All right. Someone tried the Pinot from 2 glasses earlier, Alexander, and he said the wine tasted completely different. So we would agree with that. We use that trick quite often. And then Chris, final question from Chris, and then we'll have a couple of minutes break. Has the smoke pollution from the bushfires in California over the last few seasons had any significant impact on the vines?
I mean, yes, definitely. I mean, with California has been blessed in terms of fire, as for sure. I mean, 17 was big in terms of fire and big in terms of destruction of vineyard. Quite a lot of vineyards were destroyed in 2017, and I think 17, the big problem is no one expected it, and it caught everyone by surprise. And your activity was really, really horrible. In 20, you probably, I mean, that's what I hear. I haven't been to California for the past 2 years now because of COVID. So it's always better when you're over there and you can talk those things with the people who live there. But from what I can see, in 2020, you had more fire, so more destruction of land, probably a little bit less destruction of vineyard itself in comparison to 17, but a massive impact of smoke. I mean, fire, when you've got fire, you've got smoke. And the problem were not vineyard being destroyed in 2020, where the smoke were around you. So a lot of the grape had smoke tents. And us, for example, as a company, we've got 3 wineries in Oregon. In 2020, we won't produce any Pinot Noir. And that's the commitment of the family towards quality. They don't want to bottle anything if there is any doubt. So
if there's any doubt of smoke taint on the grapes, is it?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of research are being done at the moment, on smoke taints, how to sort of fight against it inside of the wine. But I think if you are a quality-oriented producer, you don't take the risk. You just don't bottle it. But it's a massive financial impact on all those companies. I know that about it. So is there a big impact? Yes. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah.
And Australia has already been doing quite a lot of experiments in smoke taint because they've been having similar problems for a good few years in terms of bushfires. So, but it's actually, as you say, it's not something that you can actually completely remove, is it, from the grapes? At the moment, anyway, they haven't got a way to do it. So, okay, Dimitri, we're going to...
Sorry, I was going just to say California, Australia, I mean, even Europe, look at Portugal, Spain. Provence this year has been really, really affected also. Is a sort of, unfortunately, the new normal to have, the fire season more and more often.
Exactly. Dimitri, we're going to take a couple of minutes to give everyone a chance to top up their wine, top up their water, top up their snacks, their food. So that's 19:45. We'll just stop talking for a couple of minutes and we'll be back at 19:47.
Good.
We're coming back on. So first thing we've got to do is we have a poll. Which did you prefer from the first 2 wines? It's a single choice answer, and it's whether you preferred the Kendall Jackson Chardonnay or the La Crema Sonomaco Pinot Noir. So that's the first of our polls this evening. And then I am going to announce that the winner for the best question in the first half was actually the COVID question about the sommelier's taste and smell and whether a sommelier could still do their job after they've had COVID. So basically, that bottle of wine is going to be sent out next week, and it's a bottle of Kendall Jackson Chardonnay. So well done. Thank you for the COVID question, Michael. So moving on then, we're moving on to the Zinfandel, and I'm changing my glass shape for the 3rd time this evening. So this is the KJ Zinfandel, also known as Primitivo in Italy, which in fact has only fairly recently been proved by DNA analysis. And Dimitri, Zinfandel, like it's an incredible grape, isn't it? It's so versatile. You can make any style of wine just about with Zinfandel.
Yeah, and that's sometimes, I mean, it's a great thing, but it can be quite confusing for people at the same time, because the bracket of what you can produce is very spread from a blush with a sweet sort of pink rosé wine to something like what we've got in front of us, to something lighter or something even richer. It's a broad sort of choices in Zinfandel, but I always say Zinfandel, it's for me, it's like Marmite. It's either you love it or you hate it. It's that sort of grape variety. But it's a great variety. And when I was working in restaurant, you always need to have it, because you've got a sort of a fan club of people out there who really, really love it. So there is that sort of continuous sales, and is always there for Zinfandel without sort of suggesting it, because, like I said, some people really sort of love. It's if you've got, I always say, it's associated with Primitivo. I mean, Primitivo is a sort of cousin to the grape, but it's one of those grape variety is probably, if there is one grape variety you will have to associate with California in terms of history, that will have to be Zinfandel, no doubt about it. It's great. I mean,
go on.
I was going to say, one of the great things about Zinfandel, and we are very lucky with Jackson Family Wine, because we have a lot of old vineyard of Zinfandel, and when you go to California, one of the things, it's very difficult to buy old vineyard of Zinfandel, because it's part of the rooted culture of like the sort of the people who sort of establish themselves in California. I mean, the establishment of California really dates back from the Golden Rush, where people moved from the east to the west to discover gold. And you had a lot of European sort of people, a lot of Spanish, a lot of Italian who brought, their culture with them, so brought wine also. And the Italian, are known to have those sort of old cutting of Primitivo with them. So when they planted those vineyards, if you want to go and buy a vineyard Zinfandel, you can't, because now they are on the second or third sort of generation of settlers from California, and they don't want to sell, because that's their history. That, what the grandfather planted over there, the vineyard is still there. It's 100 years old. It's got a lot of history. So there is a lot of old vine of Zinfandel, and you can't buy it because it's a lot of small plot, but people don't want to sell it because that's their roots, that's their history. And as we know, in California is quite new. It's what 170 years of history, really. So
it's a really luscious wine, and the tannin is very restrained, so it's not an overpowering red. And the food matches that you suggested, I mean, they're quite rich food matches, beef cheek confit with red wine and a mushroom and black pepper sauce. It sounds absolutely delicious, because the wine can stand up to quite rich foods, can't it?
Yeah. I always used to say to people, if one day you've got a dinner party and you drink a bottle of white and you drink a bottle of red and you want something else and you don't know what to open, because I always say in wine it's nice to have a sort of a progression. If you always ask yourself, so what do I go for, at the end, I always say to people, open a bottle of Zinfandel, because Zinfandel will always be quite high in alcohol, 14.5%. It's got a lot of sort of sweetness content due to the grape and the late maturity of the grape and the sugar content into the grape. So that would go after anything. I mean, Zinfandel can go after a Pinot Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon, because it's got that sort of lush sort of character on the palate, and that slight sweetness also to a certain extent, who can go after anything. I always say to people, I always had a big frustration when I present wine and when I do dinners, because as a company, we don't produce a lot of sweet wine. And I don't know if it's because I'm French, but I've got a very sweet tooth. So my frustration was always to finish on on cheese and not have dessert or have nothing. So I spent a lot of time at sort of looking at dessert, what I could match with a dry red wine like the Kendall Jackson Zinfandel or other Zinfandel. So I always say chocolate goes quite well with Zinfandel as long as the chocolate is too bitter. If it's cacao, it becomes too bitter, so too strange Zinfandel. But if you do something like a marquise of chocolate, so sort of milk chocolate with white chocolate, with some sort of marinated cherry, will remind you, the sort of the taste that you get in the Zinfandel, that sort of a red cherry character or red plum character. Actually, it works. So,
it works nicely.
It works quite nicely. So yeah. So for people who don't,
I would think it would be quite nice with venison and things like that as well, Dimitri.
Definitely gamey. With sort of smoke also is quite nice because you've got that sort of smoky character also into the wine. So, Zinfandel is very popular in the US with sort of barbecue also food. So, a good sort of rib of beef on the barbecue or something quite smoked or something marinated, something Asian quite well. Anything with marinated with a little bit of sweetness, because you've got that sort of velvet, sort of broad and velvety sort of suave character on the. That's always quite a good match. And thing who's got spice also, as long as it's a sweet spice. Zinfandel, it's always a sort of a good go-to. But can handle quite a lot.
We have another question here about COVID, Dimitri, from Gary. Hi, Dimitri. Did COVID affect production at all, i.e. vineyard teams were not able to work?
Depending on where you are around the world, you had a lot of derogation for people, to be able to travel for harvest time and everything. So government were quite supple because production still had to carry on. What has affected, I think a lot of some of the businesses, it's if you are a small producer, in California, in Santa Barbara, and you are quite small and you rely a lot on tourism to come to your winery, visit, be at your tasting room, and that's true to a lot of Europe. That's a sort of a route to markets that you didn't really have. Some producer also, rely a lot on restaurant. So that route to market was sort of completely gone. So a lot of people had to readjust. And the problem is if you are a small enterprise, a small producer, did you have time to sort of relook at your whole distribution process? Not really. So the people had to, work the vineyard, work inside of the winery. Yes, they can go and travel to present their wine, but if you can't travel, if you don't have the people coming to you, it's difficult. So some people have struggled. Has it affected, the growing of the cycle of the plants and as such? Not really. And if you had staff, people were still carrying on sort of working in the vineyard and so on. So production-wise, not really. It's more the distribution, the selling, and the sort of the financial impact that COVID also had to the whole industry as such.
No, I understand. We're going to move on to the Cabernet, Dimitri, and we have someone who would like to talk a bit more about glass shapes. So I'm just pouring my Cabernet now, and I'm actually using the same glass as Zinfandel. These are Riedels, and I know that the Riedel have a specific Zinfandel glass, and they have a specific glass for Cabernet Sauvignon. But maybe you would talk a bit about why it's important to have a different shape of Cabernet glass, say, to the Pinot Noir. Just to recap on that, because the question's been asked again.
Pinot Noir, you always have to have a glass with the top being quite broad to get, that sort of old, that sort of very fine and delicate sort of something. Cabernet Sauvignon as a grape has got a thicker skin, and what people sometimes don't realize, it's what gives the taste to the wine really it's everything is concentrated in the skin. The pulp inside of the grape, it's really the sort of the transport material to get everything extracted from the skin with where the aromas. Cabernet Sauvignon has got a much thicker skin than Pinot Noir, so tends to produce sort of wine who will be stronger in terms of character and will have sort of deeper character. So the shape of wines that you want is something quite a little bit larger at the base, but who tend to sort of close down at the top, because then you can get the sort of all the aromas, coming from it. That's what you want. So quite broad. Cabernet Sauvignon, especially when it's young, and even one like Kendall Jackson Cabernet Sauvignon. I mean, the one you've got in front of you, I think it's 18 with what we've got. It's 18 first is a fantastic vintage. So never be afraid, especially when it's young, to decant the wine. So to open the bottle, pour it into a decanter.
Two shapes of glasses here.
Yeah. So you see the Pinot Noir much broader, much broader as a style.
Dimitri, there's some questions coming in, but I'm going to ask you to describe again from a sommelier's point of view with the Cabernet Sauvignon, if you could describe the aromas and the flavors for us.
Yes, I mean, I think this Cabernet Sauvignon, especially, a lot of our food comes from the Sonoma area. So not the Napa. A lot of Cabernet Sauvignon people will know from Napa, who tends to be a little bit probably broader and on that sort of maybe sweeter sort of character. For me, Kendall Jackson has got that sort of lovely sort of blackberry sort of character, that sort of black cherry, very sort of bright fruit, that sort of cassis or blackcurrant is very typical. It's one of the aromas and you get from Cabernet Sauvignon, but I think it's got also, that sort of round, rich, sort of quite tight. I mean, because the grapes are slightly closer to the ocean, it's slightly fresher. So for me, you get also a sort of tannin structure, a sort of firmness through the mid palate of the wine, where you get a good acidity. It's not just sweet fruit. It's got also a sort of what I call the backbone of the wine. So the wine has got all those sort of black fruit characters, that black cherries, that black currant. Then you start to get, that sort of smoky, sort of cedary, sort of character, sort of leathery character. But on the palate, in terms of sensation, you get that sort of restraint, that sort of the tannins are a little bit grippy because the wine is young, and it's also because it's grown in sort of cooler area. But what's nice also, it's when I always say, when you swallow the wine, take a little bit of air in your palate like that. And when you do that, it's like you've got a second explosion of a lot of aromas from the wine. And I like to do that personally, but I also like to tell people, because everyone is very surprised and say, wow, it's true, you bring back a little bit of air and you've got all those sort of flavor and aromas coming back, is quite nice. But a lot of sort of black fruit character. That's what, I think this Cabernet Sauvignon, black fruit, that sort of smoky, that sort of graphite, that sort of under earth, sort of earthy sort of character.
Slightly savoury notes. More savoury than the Zinfandel or the Pinot, actually. It's got a slightly lead, sort of savoury, it's good. Someone's asking, Owen is asking about whether the Chardonnay oakiness over time has changed. Australians have moved away from quite oaky Chardonnay, which we know is a fashion thing to some extent, isn't it?
It is a fashion thing, and it also came from sometime a little bit of people not having the knowledge. I always say, I mean, really the big move of sort of big, rich, sort of oaky Chardonnay came in the sort of 70s and 80s. And that's where really the sort of the wine scene really exploded into the new world country. I always say, if you go to Australia, to New Zealand, to even America, 80% of the wines they were making before the 1960s were fortified wine. So the way we know wine now is quite recent, some is sort of 60 years of history. And when the people who sort of went into the wine business, when they went to study very often, I mean, a lot of people went to study in Bordeaux, because in terms of red wine, Bordeaux was a sort of the reference of the wine world because of their history, of the classification they had. Not saying that they were the best in the world, but they were the references. So a lot of people went to Bordeaux, and when they studied wine as making red wine, not white wine. So a lot of winemakers, when they went back to Australia, they applied the same sort of method of vinification for red wine, for white wine. What we know, I mean, with experience and everything, you don't make red wine the same way than you make white wine. Like red wine, you do all your sort of technical sort of aspects, so your alcoholic fermentation, your malolactic fermentation, and then you put the wine into the barrel. Okay. For white wine, you tend to do those sort of technical operation inside of the barrel, because it means that the juice will digest a lot more the oak aging. And people in the 60s, 70s, and 80s were doing, aging the wine after all the vinification process into barrel. Now people are doing the vinification process inside of the barrel, making the wine much more integrated. So the style has changed. I think people also have changed. A lot of the grape, and that's true to Kendall Jackson. If I look at the sort of the old sort of sourcing for Kendall Jackson when they were first making it, the vineyard were further from the ocean from what they are now. So now we are in cooler area, explaining why the style is much fresher than yes. So is there an evolution past 30 or 40 years? Definitely. Yeah. But that's also what I mean. Kendall Jackson, it's an American wine with very popular. Is popular everywhere around the world. But I always say the American palate has been educated with Kendall Jackson for Chardonnay, and Kendall Jackson definitely have had an evolution. I mean, the first vintages of Kendall Jackson, the wine had residual sugar, so the wine was off dry a lot more than what it is. So yes.
More subtle use of oak now, and less sugar, as you say. People's palates have become more sophisticated, really.
Yeah, less new oak. Exactly. That's what they want. It's a more refined sort of product, and really, oak is a big factor, but it's also the sourcing. I mean, where our vineyards are. Most of our vineyards are close to the ocean now for Kendall Jackson, and before they were probably in warmer.
And I mean, and I suppose historically, if you look at the Australians, the oak was almost like it was almost on top of the wine, whereas now oak should be more like salt and pepper rather than a sauce, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I like that connotation of salt and pepper. I mean, oak in wine should be here to season, not to overtake and give the primary character. That's
Peter's asking, given the vastness of KJ vineyards and the variety of the grapes grown, how long does it take to bring a new wine to the market?
I mean, it depends of the wine, and it depends what we want to do. I mean, for sure, aging of Cabernet Sauvignon will be longer than like for the Chardonnay. I said for the Chardonnay, it's 7 months in oak. The Cabernet Sauvignon, will be between 11 to 12 months, depending on the year to a certain extent. So you've got already more time in a cellar, more time also often before it's released. So it would depend. It would depend of the wine. It depends what you want to do with the wine. If you produce a white wine with dry, crisp, and fresh, you want it to be in the market fairly quickly, because that's what you want from the wine. For a Cabernet Sauvignon has got a year, you want to wait also a little bit, because otherwise the product can be a little bit offensive if he has been aged in oak. The wine needs to settle down. So I'll say different depending on what you make and what you want also the customer to enjoy. What style. Some people, hold their wine for longer because they want people to enjoy a more mature vintage. But if you do that, it's a sort of you need to be financially quite sound, because keeping your wine for longer in a cellar, it's money than sort of sleep. So,
Dimitri, I don't know if you can see the results of the poll, but the poll number 2. which did you prefer between the second two wines? The Zinfandel or Cabernet Sauvignon? It's exactly 50-50.
Is it?
Yeah, I didn't see the results of the first one, sorry. Maybe the team can let us know that one. Yeah, I think, oh, and poll number one, the Pinot Noir, 60% of the of people on the online tasting preferred the Pinot and 40% the Chardonnay. So interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
I think that last question was about new wines coming to market, as in maybe new plantings. And we have a second question. Are you considering planting any new grape varieties in your vineyards, perhaps to compensate for climate change?
That's very interesting. But yes, there is yes, definitely, and he has started already a few years ago. Like any, I mean, like a lot of people who have got a sort of long-term vision in wine, and I mean, like I said, we've got more than one winery, and Kendall Jackson, it's of a good size. So we have to, you know, think of the future, think of the climate changing and everything. So yes, we've been doing so for a few years, and we're monitoring, but all those sort of things, I think what people don't realize, it takes a lot of time, because if you had a vineyard and you want to use that vineyard to plant a new grape, so you've got to, you know, often it's because it's an old vineyard. It's not always a sort of a new areas, and we want to develop. So you have to pull the vines, and you have to let the land sort of rest, and you have to plant the vineyard. And when you plant the vineyard, you can't. You have to wait 3 years before your first harvest. So the time is very long. It's very long. And if you want to try a new grape, you can't just try 1 year and say, you know, it was great. You have to study it over 2 or 3 years. So that sort of process take a decenny, takes roughly about 10 years, you know, for a year to start to think, okay, you know, I'm going to plant more because the results are great and everything. And so yes, we've started, I'll say quite a long time ago, that process, because yes, we want to see the family is so quality orientated, and then we have to do those sort of things, no doubt. Yeah. So yes.
As you say, it takes a long time to come up with a new grape variety. But say, for example, you wanted to launch a new Chardonnay or a new Zinfandel, but you had the fruit already, you had the vineyards, and you wanted to do a new expression of Chardonnay or Zinfandel or Pinot or Cabernet. How long would that take in terms of coming up with the name of the wine, the brand concept, getting the quality right, etc.? I mean, obviously that wouldn't take 10 years, would it?
No, I mean, no, if you've got the fruit already and the vineyard, potentially you can develop it over, I'll say, 12 to 18 months.
Okay, so a couple of years really from when you have the fruit and you're happy with the quality and so on.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to hear, because you gave us some very interesting food and wine matches this evening. So if anyone wants to share their thoughts on the food and wine matches on the chat, that would be great. Poll 3 has just gone up, which is what was the overall star of the evening. KJ Chardonnay, La Crema Sonoma Pinot Noir, KJ Zin, or KJ Cabernet Sauvignon. I'm voting now for mine. I don't know if I'm allowed to vote, but I voted anyway. So that's the third.
So your result.
Sorry?
Can you let us know what you voted for after?
I will after we get the results. I wouldn't like to be influencing anyone. So if anyone wants to share any of their thoughts on the food matches this evening, or if they want to share any of their own food matching that they did, I'd be delighted to hear about them. In the meantime, Dimitri, what I think would be really interesting is for you to talk to us a little bit about how you would approach food matching if you were going to, if you were, say, having a dinner party, or you were thinking that you were going to be doing a talk about food and wine matching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you would approach that.
I mean, really, there is sort of there is probably two main roads to take in terms of wine matching. It's really, so you've got the flavor of the wine with the main components that should be, you know, the sort of the, some people will do it differently. I mean, maybe because I'm a wine geek, I always sort of pick the wine first and then think about the food second. But it's looking at the main flavor of both the wine and then after, you know, the plates and you've got in front of you. Often in terms of food, so in terms of the plate you've got in front of you, the main element the main element and the sort of the main flavor will often be, you know, the fish, a piece of meat, and you have in front of you. But the sauce can have a big influence depending if the sauce is rich or not. That can sort of transform the dish. So it's sort of analyzing, you know, the sort of some of the main flavors and will come from, you know, the dish and it's in front of you. And then in terms of food and wine matching, what you can do, it's either you try to match the main flavor of the dish with similar flavors and you will find into the wine. That's the sort of the more classic sort of food and wine matching that you can do. Or then you try to create contrast. And I always say to people, I mean, as an example, you know, if you take something very simple like smoked salmon, in smoked salmon, you will have, I mean, salmon, it's a rich fish. It's a very oily, it's a very fatty sort of fish. So when you eat it, you always have that sort of sensation of slight sweetness, roundness, sort of oiliness on the palate. And if it's smoked, you get all those smoke character. So if you think of a smoked salmon, if you want to go on the same sort of aromas, I mean, actually, Chardonnay from Kendall Jackson will be quite a good match because you've got that sort of tropical, that sort of textural element to bring that sort of oiliness on the palate. The oak brings that sort of smoky, sort of creamy. So that's, for me, will be a great food and wine matching because they are on the same level. Or if you want to play on something on the contrast, then you take something with opposite. So if you've got a flavor like the smoked salmon, with rich, with oily, you sort of put something with very wine with very dry, crisp, fresh. You know, the opposite, because what that wine will do, it will cut through the richness and the fatness of the salmon. And I always say, you know, it's a little bit like when you put lemon on top of salmon, you create that sort of contrast of flavor who goes lovely together. So that's the sort of, you know, on the very short time, okay, what in terms of food and wine matching, and yeah, that's the sort of two main road than you can do. But look at the sort of the main flavor, and often the main flavor is the main element will be the meat and the fish, but the sauce can have a big influence. I always say, you know, look at a garnish also can have an influence if it's strong on flavor. If you've got, let's say, you know, if it's asparagus season and you've got a lot of asparagus, you will have that sort of very green sort of character. So take also that, because that can affect also your food and wine matching. So it's Dimitri, looking at what.
I mean, given that you're formally trained in food and wine matching as part of your Master Sommelier process and exams and so on, do you tend to stick with the formal rules, or are you experimental at home when you're doing things?
I think it depends on my audience.
Okay.
But I'm quite experimental, I have to say.
Okay.
I mean, I like challenging. I think that's what's quite exciting.
So what's the most outrageous thing you've done recently that worked from a food and wine matching point of view?
Oh, the most outrageous things that I've done,
or even the simplest, but it just worked, you know.
I mean, you know, one of the great things, I mean, I'm French, so I love cheese. One of the great food and wine matching for me, it's white wine and cheeses. I mean, I'm from the Loire Valley, so, you know, a great Sauvignon with a Croton Chavignol or a goat cheese, you know, there is some very good cheese. I can't remember the name, but from Scotland recently, it was absolutely fantastic. And if you've got a nice, dry, crisp, fresh Sauvignon Blanc, I think it's wonderful. I love Comté with a rich, creamy, or, you know, hard cheese with like a Montrego or Old Gouda or you know, catcher or something like that, with great Chardonnay, well, oaky, buttery, and with a little bit of age. The more age your cheese is, I think the more age your Chardonnay will be also, because you start to get those sort of slightly mushroom truffly character. I mean, one of the things which excite me, white wine and cheese in general, I love to play with that. I think it's great.
Interesting. Someone's asking Dimitri if you're involved in the winemaking process. And I think that's a good point for me to mention that you have your own wine that you're making in the Loire in Cancy, which is called Quartz, and O'Brien's sell it. And tell us a bit about your own winemaking now in the Loire.
I mean, it's a long story, but when my grandmother passed away, she had some land on the appellation, was not planted. So 12 years ago now, I bought the land and with the idea of developing it. So I planted the vineyard. It took me a long time to plant the vineyard because there is so much regulation in France, and it's hard and it's a long process. But anyway, the winemaking I'm doing, I mean, I like this year we are trying to convert it into organic viticulture. I mean, we've been trying to convert into organic viticulture for quite from the beginning, really. I mean, this is my fourth harvest. So we're taking the road. This year has been tough because the weather hasn't been that great in the north of France. So it was a bit more complicated, but one of the things I like, it's indigenous yeast, who I think give a little bit more sort of mouth feeling into the wine. So that's one of the direction I wanted to get, my wine on. My vineyard is still quite young, so I'm buying some grape from an older vineyard also to make sure that what's inside of the glass it's even better. I don't really like oak with Sauvignon Blanc. We've tried with eggs, so ceramic eggs, and I'm not a big fan either. I think if I use oak down the line, if I sort of develop a cuvée with oak, I will use very large sort of content, so you don't sort of 1,000 or 1,200 sort of barrel, because I don't really like new oak onto Sauvignon Blanc. I think it tends to take away. But what I like is that sort of lively, fresh, refreshing sort of perfume character of the Sauvignon Blanc where I'm from. So I think in terms of winemaking, indigenous yeast, because I like that sort of slightly rounder, sort of textural sort of element it gives to the wine that we produce in the world. So. But Cancy, it's a great appellation, small appellation. It's much smaller than Sancerre, so people don't really know about it because it's only 300 hectares. It's the oldest white wine appellation of the Loire Valley. So they had the AOC statute with the sort of the appellation system within France before Sancerre. A lot of people don't know that. We are quite well known for Sauvignon. And I mean, I always say the project is interesting because that's the roots of my family. That's where we've lived for the family. We've been there for 300 or 400 years. And me being in the wine business, it would have been crazy to let it go. I went back in about 3 weeks ago. I was in France, so I was inside. And when you are inside of your own vineyard, it feels good. It's always quite special.
I'm sure it does. I've actually popped the name of the wine up on the chat for people, your own wine, if people are interested. It's on the group chat. So just to share some food pairings this evening, brie, comté, crackers, prosciutto, artichoke, Savran cheese, chocolate, goat's cheese, and cranberry and baguette. So lots of gorgeous cheeses going on there with the wines tonight. Someone's having aged Manchego with the Chardonnay. It worked really well, which is interesting, Dimitri. You've just actually suggested that yourself. And voting for all the California wines, says Carolyn, Chris's wife from Northern California. Go California, Zin. Okay. Christoph is saying that his favorite match is blue cheese with Montbazillac, which I think is a fabulous match. Any sweet wine with blue cheese usually is delicious, or with things like foie gras. It's just a fantastic match with, with the sweet wine. And some, my girlfriend family is from Sonoma and they belong to a few wineries. What advice would you give to an Irish guy who is new to wine in order to not sound stupid when he goes tasting with the semi-pros?
I mean, it's wine can become a bit too fancy sometimes. I think, try and just say what you like, because when you tell people what you like, they will also be able to direct you, and give you some experience, with similar to, the gray. I mean, I always say, if you like Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, if someone give you a Merlot, there is some similarity into the grapes. So as long as you don't go too far from what you like, so don't be afraid to tell what you like. That will be my advice. There is no stupid question either. So ask question. It's all about educating yourself. Like I say, no one knows everything about wine, and that's the great things about it. No one will ever know. It's an evolving sort of a subject, because there is new vineyards, there is grape variety, you can plant on different soils, so that will have a different expression. What the winemaker wants to give also will create a different expression. The vintage also has got some importance, because that will give a different expression. So don't be afraid. A lot of people are too afraid about wine, but so tell your opinion, say what you like, and that's what's going to make you sort of evolve and get more knowledge, because don't be afraid about talking about it. That would be my advice. Look at what you like.
And I think also, Dimitri, is not to be intimidated by experts, because the reality is that if someone who is an expert tells you that a wine tastes of a bilberry or a guava, and you've never tasted those fruits before, then there's no way that you can know what they're talking about. But there's so many potential flavors and aromas in wine, then if you smell apple, then you smell apple, and that's okay to say that. Or you taste green apple, then that's okay to say that. And the next person might taste citrus, or the next person might get a hint of melon, and that's okay as well, because everyone's working from their own aromas and flavor and taste memory. And you can only taste and smell what you've actually tasted and smelled in your life before. So I think not to be intimidated by what someone else says, and to really believe in what you can smell and taste. And some people are going to say something, you're going to identify with it. But the other side of it is you may not identify with it, and that's okay too, is my view.
Yeah, and be curious, experience, and if wine is a subject that you like, also educate yourself, because as you said, one of the problem of people is are afraid on describing wine because they don't have the vocabulary. So search yourself. Is someone you talk about for Sauvignon Blanc? If you've never had a gooseberry, go and test a gooseberry also. I mean, that's
exactly
part of the education. So I agree with you.
Smell tomatoes, smell peppers, smell the difference between a tangerine and a mandarin or an orange, and just sort of think about, those, when you get those opportunities to smell and taste, then it's a good thing to do. Right, poll 3 is in, so it's quite close actually. The winning wine of the evening was La Crema Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir with 32%. Second wine was Kendall Jackson Chardonnay with 27%. The Zinfandel was 23%, and the Chardonnay was 18%. So Chardonnay 18%, Cabernet 27%, sorry, Zin 23%, Cabernet 27%, and Pinot Noir 32%. So come on, Dimitri, what was your favorite wine tonight? Because it could change tomorrow, I know that.
I'll say probably tonight at this time, I think La Crema Sonoma Coast Pinot Noir.
It was, yeah, me too. I voted for the Pinot Noir tonight. But the wonderful thing about wine is the weather could be different tomorrow. The air pressure could be different tomorrow. Your mood could be different tomorrow, and it might be the Cabernet Sauvignon. And that's what's amazing about wine.
Definitely. And the other things, there is no right, no wrong.
Exactly.
It's your preferences. And that's the most important. That's why, don't be afraid.
Exactly.
We're all people also. So. Yeah.
Okay, a couple more questions then. Aside from the obvious, Sideways, what's your favorite wine-related movie? So apart from Sideways, what's your favorite wine movie?
A Day in Provence with Russell Crowe.
A Day in Provence with Russell Crowe.
Yeah,
right.
It's a great. Well, I mean, it's quite a romantic sort of story, but in Provence, I quite like the film. I'm an old romantic.
You're French as well. Everything goes back to France. I noticed your questions lots of times tonight. point back to France, which is fine. Bottle Shop, someone's saying as well, which is a good movie as well. There's actually there's a champagne film premiering next Thursday evening in Ireland, and it's basically all about champagne industry, champagne houses made by a French producer called Frank Magnon, and he's actually a director and film producer. So it's a really interesting film, covers most of the big champagne houses, and if anyone gets a chance to see it, then it's definitely worth seeking it out. I've just got to mention a couple of things. We've got our next tasting is on the 7th of October, and that's actually a Spanish tasting in the wines of Crema. There are a few tickets left for that online if anyone's interested. And then on the 25th of November, we have John Charles Caz from Chateau Lynchbage with us, and we're going to be tasting his wines from the Languedoc. We're going to be tasting Chateau Lynchbage itself, and we're also going to be tasting Domaine de Sénéchaux, which is his wine from the Rhône. And actually we've got Cordillon-Bage as well. So that will be going on sale towards the end of this month, and that tasting's on the 25th of November. And someone's very cleverly popped the link up to the Spanish tasting. And we have another question here, Dimitri. Some companies are now doing wine tastings on moon rising only. So obviously biodynamic calendar. What do you think of that, Dimitri?
Is there, I mean, has that got an influence? I would say yes. I think the wine can present itself differently. Is it better? I think it's more about the aromatic and everything, but does that mean that we have to drink wine only when the moon goes up? Not really.
No. Okay.
That's wine for every opportunity, but does the moon has an influence on how wine can taste? Yes, it's all those sort of things is very funny because one of the things, and I remember going and when I was young and a kid, I always remember my uncle. He always used to say, Dimitri, he said, you always bottle wine when the moon goes up and the wind comes from the north. And I remember one of my first trip in Burgundy when I was 18 or 19 years old. One of an old winemaker, the guy was in his 70s, it was Rossignol Changarnier, was called. And he said, do you want to do an interesting tasting? It was only 2 or 3 sommeliers, so it's a very small group. And we said, of course, yes. So the guy gave us 2 different bottles of wine, and the wine were completely different. And he said, okay, one was bottled at this time, and the moon was going up. The other one, the moon was going down, and the wine tasted like 2 different wines. Incredible. So wow. Does he have an interaction? Yes, definitely. I think more and more people are looking at it and are seeing the sort of the impacts than you do. I mean, you always say when the moon goes up, yes, it tends to, when you bottle and you cork the bottle, your wine tends to have a lot more fruit sort of flavor into it. So do I believe in it? Yes, I do believe in it. Yeah. But that doesn't mean that it should restrain you and you should become obsessed about it either. So that's my thing.
Okay. Interesting. Well, listen, Dimitri, thank you very much. We're actually at the end of our time now. I think we could have gone easily for another hour. Just another couple of questions. We don't have any in-person tastings planned as yet. They're all online for the rest of this year, and the interests of safety is where we feel we're going to keep it for the moment. We don't have an Italian one on the agenda, but we will have soon, probably straight after Christmas. The European wines are kind of middle of harvest at the moment, which makes them quite hard to get in the autumn. But we've definitely got plans to do an Italian one online. Spanish wine tasting says it's sold out, but there are more tickets going up on Monday. So Joe, if you want to keep an eye on that. All right, someone's just said that from O'Brien's. Great. Listen, thank you everyone for joining us. It's been fascinating chatting with Dimitri. Dimitri, thank you so much for giving us your time, and your wealth of knowledge has just been incredible for us to tap into. So we've really enjoyed having you, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope you enjoyed it at home.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me, Lynne. It's always a great pleasure. And hopefully, people with the most important for us, people have enjoyed, our wine. California, it's a beautiful place. They produce some incredible wine with a great diversity also. So, experience what California has got to have. Hopefully, when you can travel, you can come and visit us also. We've got, Kendall Jackson Wine Center is fantastic. We've got a great tasting room where we do a lot of food and wine matching. So for people who are interested in that, go to Kendall Jackson Wine Center. The sort of the program we've got in terms of food and wine matching, it's pretty impressive. So come and visit us, and hopefully you like our wine, and remember Kendall Jackson La Crema. Please buy our wine.
Dimitri, that sounds like a plan when we can get back on a plane again, for sure. And finally, thanks very much to Brian's team behind the scenes who make everything go very, very smoothly. So thanks, and good night, everyone. And again, thanks, Dimitri. Night all.
Good night, everyone.